while minimizing operational impacts. Funding that exceeds $200 million annually and is utilized to invest in GPA's infrastructure and is led by Mr. Novac with a team of consultants, contractors, and professional staff. In addition to the capital improvement program, Mr. Novac leads the facilities maintenance team at the GPA, who are responsible with maintaining over $4 billion in facilities assets with 7,800 acres of property throughout the state of Georgia. Mr. Novac's diverse experience as a civil engineer, division leader, contract administrator, and program manager allows for the successful implementation of programs and projects that include marine civil infrastructure, renovation, gantry cranes, and terminal equipment, intermodal rail facilities, office buildings, warehousing, security infrastructure, iconic structures, and transportation systems. Prior to joining the Georgia Ports Authority, Mr. Novac worked for CH2M Hill as a senior program manager that included an international assignment as the transportation program manager at Masdar City, Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. While in Abu Dhabi, Mr. Novac developed and implemented the program management tools and techniques to successfully deliver the initial phase of the Advanced Technology Personal Rapid Transit System, PRT, that is currently utilized as the public transportation system within the unique city of Masdar. The fully automated driverless automobile system is projected to cost over $750 million while fully completed, and is the most innovative and complex component of the new city that will eliminate the need for fossil fuel vehicles. In addition to the PRT system, Mr. Novac has also managed the planning and design of other transportation modes in Masdar City, including light rail and metro rail, as well as the construction of an external roadway and parked car network that serves as the boundary from conventional transport to the sustainable, renewable energy environment that is Masdar City. Prior to his work assignment in the Middle East, Mr. Novac was employed in the Ports Everglades Construction Management and Planning Division in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. While at Port Everglades, Mr. Novac rose from the Ports Engineering Program Manager to serve as the Director of the division for many years. During his tenure, Mr. Novac led a group of professional employees and implemented a capital improvement program that exceeded $60 million annually. It included cruise terminal construction, waterfront structures, container yard development, and port equipment. Mr. Novac is a registered engineer in the states of Florida, Tennessee, and Georgia, and has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from the University of Miami. And with that, let's give Chris Novac a warm welcome.
Thank you. You know, when I came here today, I reminded myself that I'm speaking with the traffic engineering group. Believe it or not, even though I'm a port guy, when I first got out of college, I spent 1 year as a traffic engineer. I worked for a company called Barton Ashman, and I realized this traffic stuff is hard, and I bailed. So since then, I've been in the port development business, and that traffic experience I still even use today as I go through some of the things that we do at the Georgia ports. Of course, the movement of goods, the movement of our facilities to feed Atlanta area and the Southeast United States is so crucial, and it's important that we have the capacity necessary to be able to grow like the Southeast United States is. The port has to feed these regions with the international cargo that we use every single day. So with that, let's get going on how do we do these things. We're all in for the future. This is a pretty cool photo of that's downtown Savannah. You can see the Talmadge Bridge. We'll talk about the Talmadge Bridge a little bit later on. But basically, back when Oglethorpe made his way here in Savannah, he had he was able to foresee and place the development of his first colony here on this bluff in Savannah. Georgia Ports is located upriver of this area in downtown Savannah. So all the large vessels transit right by downtown Savannah. So if you ever get down to Savannah, you can see all the vessels going right by. We're about 16 miles from the Atlantic Ocean from this location. So the Savannah River, of course, is our main drag that provides that cargo back and forth from the terminals. So let's just get started, give you a quick little video on our facility. Just from the video, you can see that there's very many diverse construction projects that take place. I'll explain a little bit how that gets planned and how we make decisions to move forward with some of the projects that we move forward with that allow our facilities to continue to expand. Just quickly, so we're here in Atlanta. Georgia only has a 100-mile coast, but on that coast is where our main terminal, Savannah, is Garden City Terminal, Ocean Terminal. And then down in Brunswick, we've got several facilities down there, Colonel's Island, Mayor's Point, and East River. We actually have a small facility out in Bainbridge. And we've got two inland ports called the Appalachian Regional Port and construction of the Blue Ridge Connector. Those are two rail facilities I'm going to get into a little bit. You guys start thinking about movement of traffic and goods and how important those facilities are. I'll get into that and what the strategy was and how we made decisions to move forward with something such as far away as the coast as those facilities are. So in the Port of Savannah, just gives you an idea, downtown Savannah is located there where you can see Ocean Terminal. Hopefully you can see that's where the Talmadge Bridge is. A little bit to the left is Garden City Terminal. That is the single largest container terminal in the United States. Bigger than any terminal in LA Long Beach, bigger than any terminal in New York, New Jersey. It's over 1,350 acres. Then Ocean Terminal adds another 200 acres. And then we have expansion on the other side of the river that we'll get into a little bit for further on in the future as we continue to grow here in the Southeast U.S. The Port of Savannah is our main drag where 90% of our business takes place with the container movement of containers in and out of the state of Georgia. So let's get down to the elementary components, the measuring of growth. This is how you guys talk about car counts and all that kind of good stuff. We go what's called a TEU. A TEU stands for 20-foot equivalent unit. So the vehicle on the left, that is a 40-foot container. That's 2 TEUs. The vehicle down on the bottom, that's a little stubby guy, 20 foot, that's 1 TEU. So at any given time, that's how we measure how many boxes come in and out of the port. This year we'll have 5 million TEUs. So that's about 3 million boxes, or a little bit more than 3 million boxes is what we'll see. So it gives you an idea. So I'm going to start talking about TEUs. So always keep that in your mind. It's a 20-foot equivalent unit, a 20-foot box. Okay? Port 101. So it's all about volumes. How are we able to determine how much volumes do we need to push through our ports? That's where a lot of folks do a lot of simulations, and we read how the economic development takes place in the Southeast United States. So over the past 10 years, the GPA container throughput, currently in 2023, we're at 5.4 million TEUs. You can see there was a little blip in 21-22. It actually increased quite drastically because of COVID. When everyone was holed up in their houses, they were buying internet stuff off of Home Depot and Best Buy. All that meant was cargo had to come through our facility. So our cargo numbers went through the roof. So that put pressure on me as the engineering developer of the GPA to make sure that our facilities can handle the cargo that all you folks wanted during COVID. And me, by the way. So how do we do these things? And that's where a lot of the planning takes place. So we know that we kind of take away from, take the COVID years out, but back in 2019, you can see since that time, 20% growth just in a short period of time. We don't even think about the COVID times because those volumes started coming back down to normal this past year. But it was an anomaly that took place. So what we look at from a growth perspective in the Southeast United States, as we all know, most folks want to move here. It's nice weather, it's a beautiful place, the land's a spectacular place. Back in 2003, the Southeast U.S., and the cargo that was making its way through, Savannah was down pretty far down on the bottom of the top tier ports in the U.S. You can see LA, Long Beach, New York, New Jersey were the big guys, Seattle, Oakland, Charleston was 1.7, we'll talk about Charleston in a second, Miami, Port Everglades, one of my last other stops. Savannah is pretty far down there, 1.5 million. But since that time frame, over the years, Savannah started to grow. Cargo continued to make their way into Savannah. 2009, 2010, we continued passing, and we continued to expand all of our facilities. Upwards to 2015, 2016, we started gaining up onto New York, New Jersey. As we started moving our way up, we're now, since 2010, the third largest terminal, third busiest port in the United States at 5.4 million. What's interesting about that is, and we'll get into some other numbers, but keep that number 8.3 million in your mind for New York, New Jersey. I'm a little competitive. We're going to pass those Yankees by the time I retire. We'll pass them. LA Long Beach is a different animal. They basically handle the entire west coast of the U.S. So we look at the East Coast version, the East Coast gateways. The gateways are New York, New Jersey takes care of the Northeast. Virginia takes care of the Mid-Atlantic. Savannah takes care of the Southeast. Those are the main gateways. That's where the largest vessels come in from Asia to come into the U.S. on the East Coast. So that just gives you an idea of the thought process, and now we need to make sure that we plan for that kind of growth. Also, there's been a shift from the West Coast to the East Coast because the East Coast is continuing to grow. Folks are moving from the West back to the East. Back in 2003, you can see the West Coast had 54% of the cargo was going through the West Coast, and on the East Coast, 46% through the side of the U.S. That was in 2003. Well, as time started moving on, there started being some shifting moving on. More and more growth took place on the East Coast of the U.S., including the Savannah location. So now, 2023, look, it's flipped. The East Coast is now 56, the West Coast is 44. What does that do for us at the GPA? That means I need to build more stuff to make sure that we can handle the demand that all of us folks require for cargo. So that requires a great deal of master planning to determine what do we put our money towards to improve. Future volumes. So let's think about that. So we already know that the East Coast of the U.S. is expanding. We already know that the Southeast is an expanded location. People are moving here. Well, from a domestic population shift, we review what's going on in the Southeast. 6.5 million since 2012. There's been a 9% growth in the Southeast U.S. And what that does is it shows that our fastest growing states, Georgia, South Carolina, Florida, Texas, all within, right in the middle of the Port of Savannah. That means that we need to get our cargo through Savannah and get it to these states quickly because those are the states that are growing the fastest in the U.S. So those kind of volumes are what we need to make sure that we prepare for. Many, many companies have relocated and have located here in Savannah and in the Georgia area and the Southeast. These are just a few of them. You might have heard of the Meta plant that's being built by Hyundai, not too far off from our doors here in Port of Savannah. It's the main reason why they selected Georgia. First of all, Georgia's #1 business to do state, number one state in the U.S. to do business. They chose Georgia to come here and set up a $7 billion plant to build their next set of vehicles here in the state. And it's close to the Port of Savannah, so those cargo can get to their facilities quickly. If you ever get a chance and you're driving down I-16, it's at exit 143. Can't miss it. Look off to the right. It's massive. $7 billion facility. It's going to be opening, I believe. First set of cars are going to be leaving there this year. So, okay, this is a little bit of a nerdy slide, but I'm going to try to explain it to you a little bit. But at the end of the day, this is the slide that I have to deal with. So let's talk about the numbers. So, and the lines. The blue line that says Mercator projection, that is the capacity of our ports. So here we are in 2023. You can see it dip down. That's our projection of 5 million is what we expected, 5 million containers, or 5 million TEUs. That's the blue line. So we project and determine how much cargo is needed in the Southeast that's going to come through the port. By 2034, we expect that blue line to hit 8 million. So that means those terminals need to be able to handle that kind of cargo. The stepping orange line is our terminal capacity. So today, we are at just under 7 million. You can see I just finished a project called CB1 completion. So that means we can handle 7 million, and currently we have 5 million coming in. So that means we've got a 2 million fluff factor. That's the green dashed line. That's a 20%. I want to make sure that our capacity is higher than our 20% increase of what we expect. So in 2034, we expect 8 million to be our volume. We want to make sure that our capacity is at just over about 9.5 million. So as I implement projects, I need to be at 9.9 million in 2034. So that's a lot of projects that we have to implement to increase the capacity of our terminals because of the cargo that's continuing to come in here. So how do we do that? There is a great deal of master planning that has to take place. The Garden City Terminal, 90% of our facilities of cargo comes through this facility. It's a 1,350 acre facility. I'm going to give you a little bit of a Port 101 using Garden City Terminal so you can kind of know what's in my mind. So there are really 3 components associated with a container terminal. Number 1, it's the waterfront. That's where that vessel comes. That's where it's going to moor up against the dock. I need to have cranes. I need to have a dock to be able to handle and move that box off of that ship and onto a truck quickly. Huge amount of money is spent on the waterfront. I got to have the equipment out there to make sure. You saw it in that cool video. All the cranes that take place that are on the terminal. That's on the waterfront side. Then you get into the container yard. When that box comes off of the container, off of the ship, it's placed into that container yard. It's stacked. It's placed into that container yard. It's stacked. The reason why that containers are stacked is Home Depot may have a box. They're not going to be coming and getting that box every time a Home Depot box comes. It gets placed in that stack. It sits there for a day, 2, 3, sometimes 7 days before it gets picked up by a truck and headed out to its location, and vice versa. An export may come in, the ship may not be ready to take it, so that export will sit in that container yard before it is ready to be placed onto a ship. So think of the logistics required to be able to move those boxes on and off. So a great deal amount of infrastructure is necessary in the container yard for cranes and facilities to be able to store that kind of cargo at any location for upwards of a week. And then the back area, I call it the support area. That's where we have our rail facilities, and we have warehouses, and U.S. Customs does inspections. Every single container goes through what's called a radiation portal monitor. Every container that comes in and out of the port is scanned for radiation. So every one of those boxes goes through support areas through the terminal. This kind of gives you an idea of different things that need to make sure that each one of those components can handle 8 million TEUs. So sometimes I'm improving the dock, sometimes I'm adding more equipment, sometimes I'm expanding a rail yard. All of those things require capacity to be able to handle these boxes. Any one of those 3 could fail and I wouldn't be able, it's the worst one, and that's my capacity. Right now my berth capacity along the water is about 8 million, but in the yard I'm at about 7. So I can handle more on the water. That means I need to increase in the yard. See, these are the things that you got to think about when you start thinking about the movement of the cargo. So just give you a couple projects, and I like photos. This just gives you an idea. So this berth facility at one point was cocked about 30 degrees, and it wasn't parallel with where those 2 ships are. So we totally redid that berth to make it a straight line berth. And I constructed additional cranes. Those cranes there are the largest cranes on the east coast of the U.S. Those cranes came in, we placed them on the dock. This was a $138 million project just for the dock to get it moved and redone. Took about 4.5 years. So during that 4.5 years, my boss was mad at me because I had one dock down while I was doing all this construction. But in the end now, it increased our capacity. So we've been using it for almost a year now. Transload facility is another warehouse facility that is in that support area. What is a transload facility? Well, basically, remember I told you TEUs, 40-foot containers. A 40-foot container may have TVs for Best Buy. It may have garage door openers for Home Depot on a 40-foot container. That 40-foot container gets placed to a transshipment facility. That box sits up against the warehouse, it gets unloaded, and then it gets sorted. And it gets placed into 53-foot containers for Home Depot, 53-foot container for 53-foot for Best Buy, and what have you. So you have to have a warehouse facility to be able to basically sort out the cargo that comes in and out off of a vessel. That was just recently completed. It was a $120 million facility that we built. This was before, where you can see where there's kind of a big empty concrete air apron. It's full of containers now. This is before we loaded it up with containers. So it's another big project that we need to do that gets cargo off the docks quicker. So I showed you our container yards. We're also, if there's ever land available adjacent to Garden City Terminal, Georgia Ports typically buys it. This was an old piece of property that was owned by, it was an acid plant. It wasn't the cleanest, I can tell you. And it was about 100 acres. This is what it looked like in June of 2022 before Novac showed up. So this is just recently completed, and now it is a fully renovated and modified container terminal with rubber tire gantry cranes ready to handle additional capacity. That brings our yard capacity, when this gets done, up to the 7 to 8 million when this is completed. So I'm always increasing capacity on many components of our terminals. That was a $204 million improvement. And by the way, all of this money that you hear about doesn't come from you and me as taxpayers. All the capital money that comes out of these facilities comes from the money that we make at the GPA. We are a self-sustaining, in Florida they call it an enterprise fund, but we basically reinvest the money that we earn into our facilities, so it helps expand the economic development of the entire state. So your tax dollars don't go towards our facilities. The Mason Mega Rail has become a big deal for us. First of all, truck traffic is, you guys know that better than anybody here in Atlanta, is pretty tough. Plus, it's also difficult to find truck drivers these days. It's getting more and more difficult for truck drivers. So we knew about 7, 8 years ago, we knew that we needed to expand our rail facilities. So when that box comes off the ship, gets placed on a rail, onto a rail, and it's trained up to Atlanta and beyond. So we knew that the hub of Savannah was going to be this Mason Mega Rail. This was our existing rail facility at the time, back in 2018. It had 6 tracks. There really wasn't any equipment. We had maybe 10% of our cargo was moving out of our facilities with rail. So and now that Novac's messed with it, it is now the Mason Mega Rail. We've got 10 rail-mounted gantry cranes, 18 tracks that handle both Norfolk Southern and CSX. So they directly place cargo on those trains and they come up to the Southeast US. No traffic that you guys have to worry about on your roads. So that is the hub area of the rail. We'll get into the inland ports in a second. We're going to get into it now. Inland ports. So what is an inland port? So basically, you're in Savannah and you're at the Mega Rail that I just showed you. A vehicle comes in, it places a box onto the train. That train then makes itself up to the ARP, which is the Appalachian Regional Port. The BRC is called the Blue Ridge Connector. And then we've got a small facility in CSX has a small facility up in North Carolina that actually handles the cargo from us here in Georgia, bypasses Charleston. So this is what an inland port looks like. This is what's being constructed currently in the Blue Ridge Connector. You can see the trains come in, we've got our cargo, they unload the boxes back and forth, and then the trucks take them and head them out into the hinterland, so they bypass Atlanta. So it's kind of like a mini port, but it's not on the marine. It allows us to pass the Atlanta area cargo up past Atlanta and up to other locations throughout the Southeast US. So that's the Blue Ridge Connector. That is currently under construction. I never thought I'd have, being a Marine guy, that I'd be building anything in the mountains. $27 million project. We are basically moving a mountain up in Gainesville to construct this level facility. Trains need level land for us to operate. And that facility is about 65% complete. When I saw it this morning, I couldn't believe how much dirt they moved. But it's going to be an impressive facility to be opening up the first quarter of 2026. So between that facility and the Appalachian Regional Port, we've got Georgia covered to be able to bypass some of that traffic that you guys are fighting here in Atlanta on the trucks perspective. Just give you an idea of the percentages. So rail handles about, I told you how we're about 5 million or so. Let's just keep 5 million TEUs. Rail handles about 20%. So 1 million TEUs goes via rail. That's a big deal. That's a lot of cargo, and we expect that to continue to rise in the future. So there's a picture of the Appalachian Regional Port that's over there in Dalton. But you can see it's basically, that's a CSX main line on the right. It pulls off, unloads its trains, and the boxes get stored. And Home Depots, Best Buys, what have you, they pick up their box and off they go. So it's an extension of our presence throughout the state. That's a photo of the Blue Ridge Connector that I saw this morning. See, it's just basically cleared facility that's right now going through earthwork. We're moving about 800,000 cubic yards of dirt to be able to make it a flat facility. Track on the right, that is the Norfolk Southern main line. So the Norfolk Southern will pull off their trains and come right into that facility. So I talked to you about Garden City Terminal, and Garden City is going to be 6 to 7 million TEUs. A little bit downriver of Garden City is Ocean Terminal, and that's the Talmadge Bridge that crosses over the Savannah River. This particular facility was a general purpose port facility. It had bulk facility, it had steel cables, it had JCB cargo, it had tractors, that kind of stuff, a lot of general stuff. We know that containers is the way of moving cargo quicker. So what we've done is all our customers that are in Ocean Terminal, we modified our terminal in Brunswick and moved this cargo. It's called RoRo, roll on, roll off. The cargo is rolled off of the ships. And all that cargo is shifted down to Brunswick. And I'm now in the process of making this terminal a container terminal. So currently, let's take a look at some before and after photo. Oh, video first. Let's just see what it looks like. Can you hear the volume? You might be, well, let's do this. You will recognize the voice. You tell me when the volume is back. Ready? We need to crank it up. No volume yet. Oh, all right, it's a spoiler alert. Our chief commercial officer was best friends with Jim Nantz, the golfing guy. He does the CBS Sports golf, and I think he does NCAA basketball and all that. He's got the golden voice. We got him to do this video for us. But sorry, you won't be able to hear it because of our technical difficulties. But anyways, let's show you what Ocean Terminal is going to look like. So basically, I'm redoing the entire dock and the terminal so it can handle containers. So it requires a great deal of, and I'll show you some photos after it, but the look of what it's going to be when it's completed is very similar to Garden City. The cranes, I'll show you a photo of the cranes, I'll tell you a little bit about that, but you can see it's got full facility for container movement, similar to what we have in Garden City Terminal. Now this will be a 2 million TEU facility. So when you add million with Garden City at 7 or so, we're at 9 million just for those two facilities. So I'm in the process now of spending $1.4 billion on Ocean Terminal renovation. It had containers, but not a very large. There was about 200,000 TEUs of containers went through this facility. We're expanding it, it's become 2 million. I'm a little bit bummed you can't hear Jim Nantz, but that's okay. We'll have a rail train through the middle of it as well. So the facility will be a mini Garden City terminal. And there's the Talmadge Bridge in the background. We'll talk about Talmadge in a second. Okay, so here is Ocean Terminal before Novac. And at that time, we had 250,000 TEUs. And when it gets done, it's going to be 1.8 to 2 million TEUs. You'll notice you can see the dock's got a small vessel. There's a bunch of warehouses. You can see that slip there in the middle. That's old port technology where they would have a slip come in there and and unload our cargo through a slip. So basically, you can see up on the upper point is where you can see the RTGs. That's where our 250,000 TEUs are, just in that top portion of it. So it's currently under construction. And over to the right, we just delivered 4 cranes. Those were delivered from China, and I'll talk to you about those cranes in a second. But you can see them redoing the berth. Basically, the ships that are going to be calling there are so wide, we had to pull the berth in because we did not want it to conflict with the Savannah River and the Federal Channel. So I had to pull the dock in 150 feet and make a capacity to handle those large cranes. And you'll notice the slip is gone. I'm taking the dirt, I moved dirt from across the river, and it's filling in the slip as well. So when it's all done, it's going to look like that Jim Nance video where all full of containers. So it's a huge investment, and this is what's taking place at this point. Right now, I've got $688 million in contracts. I expect that to increase in the next couple of months. We'll continue to do additional work. GDOT is one of our biggest partners with us, and you can see the Talmadge Bridge. It's making its way it's on basically the east side of Ocean Terminal. In order to make sure that our truck traffic does not interact with the local neighborhoods, GDOT approved our request to have a direct access from Ocean Terminal right onto the ramp of the Talmadge Bridge. It's the only private development ramp onto an interstate in a state. That was nice that GDOT allow that. But think about it, we're partners, we're all state agencies, and we're able to put trucks directly onto the highway without having to go into neighborhoods. Across the river from Ocean Terminal is Savannah Container Terminal. I'm currently planning this. This is in for permit right now with the Corps of Engineers. That adds another 2.5 to 3 million TEUs of capacity. So when I finish Ocean Terminal, I'm going to go across the river and we're going to do Savannah Container Terminal. So when you add all those numbers up, it's some pretty big numbers. But the Talmadge Bridge is the next piece that it's a little bit of a challenge. Right now it's 185 feet up from the water level to the top of the bridge. The largest vessels, it won't make it under the bridge. So you know, GDOT's just gonna raise it nice. That's very nice of them. But that is a necessity that we're working together with GDOT to move forward with for improvements to the Talmadge Bridge. There's 2 components to the Talmadge Bridge. There's a short-term solution and there's a long-term solution. Some folks have been getting confused about that. And let me explain what they are. So the short term, and you guys are all engineers, you'll think about what this is going to take. So you can see how they have the cable stays on that bridge. Right now it's 185 feet up. Those cable stays need to be replaced. And they have been working with some of their partners. They're going to replace those cables, but they're going to tighten them. And they believe they can tighten it and raise that bridge up 21 feet. So it's going to be 185 to 206. So bigger vessels can get underneath it. That's the short-term solution. I believe they're going to start doing that work in about a year, year and a half. They've not given me their final calculations that show me it's exactly 21 feet, but that's what they're hoping. If it's less than 21 feet and it's lower, 5 feet, it's probably not worth it, but we'll see what their numbers are. They got a lot of smart people, smarter people than me, calculating to determine, and then there's a sequencing they have to do for which cable gets tightened when to raise the bridge. And then they've got to mess with the approach slabs and all that other kind of good stuff. I don't know about you, last time in Miami, concrete didn't stretch. I don't know about other schools, but we'll see what they come up with. So 21 feet is what they say. So that's the solution. We'll be able to get bigger vessels underneath the bridge with this additional 21 feet. Solution. You guys all know GDOT. They have a lot of studies. We're looking of replacing the Talmadge Bridge. Currently, there are 2 options. I'm sure you can guess which option I like. So option number 1 is to replace the bridge so there's 230 foot of clearance. Why 200? 230 feet is the clearance of the Melba Rock Bridge in the Suez Canal. Going in through the Suez, then can come through Savannah. So 230 feet, it's pretty tall. Option number 2, tunnel would require probably going down about 50 feet below the bottom of the Savannah River. The Savannah River is minus 47, so the top of that tunnel would be probably minus 100. So the tunnel is the second option that's being reviewed. I would never have to worry about height again, so you kind of know which one I would prefer. But we'll let them come up, they have to do all their environmental and benefit cost ratio and all that stuff. It's not been funded. GPA is funding the studies. Studies are expensive, but it's so important for the state, for us to move forward, for us to expand and be able to do some of the stuff that you saw up there. We're working with our friends at GDOT to see what's the best solution from a long-term perspective. So they got the short term and the long term that they're explaining that in 10 words in a newspaper article, so there's always a lot of confusion. But it's good to talk to technical folks like you guys, so you guys get it and you understand that there's a lot of work needs to be done just to get to that point. So record investing, currently I have $1.9 billion in purchase orders that are taking place over the next 10 years, 12 years or so, $4.5 billion, which includes that Savannah Container Terminal. Does not include the Talmadge Bridge. The Talmadge Bridge is a GDOT project, so we'll have to work with them to go through the feds and make sure that that gets funded in that fashion. So all that $4.5 billion is investment at the Georgia ports for us to increase our capacity. So as we move forward, currently we're at 7.5. We'll be at 10 when Ocean Terminal opens up, and then when Savannah Container opens up in 2033, we're at 12 million. Remember, we needed to be at 8, and then 20% of that puts us to 9.5. We'll be at 12, so we're going to be well above what we need from a capacity perspective. We'll be able to handle the growth that's necessary here. So there's a lot going on at the port. It's a great deal of fun. A lot of interesting projects that make their way. I utilize some of that traffic engineering that I had for that short time in my career, and it does help me on a lot of things that we do here at the GPA. So I know I showed a lot of things to you guys. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer any of them. Usually the engineers give me good ones. Yes, sir.
I don't think you mentioned the Baltimore Bridge. I was just wondering if the Baltimore Bridge is affecting it.
That's a good question. Well, yes, it did. Two things. Number one, when that morning happened, we received calls almost immediately, and they were asking about the Talmadge Bridge. Could this happen to Savannah? The answer is no. The reason why is you saw on the Talmadge Bridge, the two columns. One is on GPA property, it's not in the water, and the other one is in an area that is not a vessel. There isn't 47 feet of water where that other column is. If it were to run out of, it would not hit the Talmadge Bridge on the columns the way it happened at Baltimore. Secondly, when it was down a month, a bit over than that, our RoRo facility down in Brunswick, it's funny how the timing of things how things happen. As I was moving our RoRo facilities down to Brunswick, so we were investing $260 million to upgrade and expand Colonel's Island, and it had opened about maybe 2 months before the tragedy in Baltimore. So when that happened, many of the customers from Baltimore can their cargo. Part of that was from the cargo. We expect, however, Brunswick has a great deal of expansion. We've got a lot of land down there that we can expand, and the Southeast is growing. Baltimore does not expect us. We would have passed Baltimore anyways, but this little item that happened to them expedited that movement for us, and more cargo came to us because we had the capacity for it. It's a good question. Yes, sir.
All the expansion projects that you're talking about are, huge multi-million-dollar projects, and you mentioned that you're not taking any tax dollars. So how are you funding it?
How do I fund?
How do you fund them?
How do I fund them? Okay, so you see all those shipping lines, Maersk, Costco, those are our customers. They come and we generate this year we are about $700 million of revenue, GPA funding. Our operational is about $200 million. So that $500 million or a little bit less than that is what we generate and we put right back into our infrastructure. So we are fully funded on all of our projects through our fees that we gather from our customers. I mean, technically, we run the port kind of like a private business, even though I'll explain the makeup of it. So we're underneath Governor Kemp. So Governor Kemp, he assigns 13 board members, the GPA board. So all these projects, I have to present and get approval by the GPA board to proceed. And they intend brief the governor, of course. So we are an authority under the governor, but we are funded wholly through our voice. Yes, sir.
So I know at least Garden City Port has like a couple of railroad crossings coming into it. Do you guys manage those, or who manages those?
Okay. Basically, two things. The rail facility, we have Norfolk Southern and we have CSX that come into our terminal. When it's manage it, but when it's outside the terminal, it's owned by or CSX. So I have to handle our own railroad on our properties, but we connect up to them for direct connection. So like the Blue Ridge Connect, you saw the Norfolk Southern, when it peels off, that becomes GPA rail. So I have to construct that component. So I'm responsible for the rail on our property, and then we connect up to them and all of their requirements that they have. So technically, I'm responsible for the construction of the rail, but the operations, what we do is we contract with a third party to operate the GPA railroad. Yes, sir.
Does eminent domain come into play if you wanted to expand your footprint, make the ports larger?
It does, yes. Eminent domain, we do have the power of eminent domain. We don't use it. It's very rare. The reason why is all of our neighbors, our neighborhoods in those areas, we want to be a partner with these different entities. And we don't want to forcefully do an eminent domain if we don't have to. And I've been there 13 years, we've never done it. In fact, even before then, I don't think they've done it in 40 years. We do have the power to do it, but whenever property comes available, more often than not, we will purchase it. But eminent domain is a very rare component that we typically do not do, but we do have that in our coffers if needed.
The 20% additional capacity, where does that number come from? Is that something from the governor's office? Is that a policy that you guys have in place, or is that just a goal?
Yeah, it's basically, from that, it's a container operations parameter. Give you an idea of the makeup of our employees and our executive staff. So, like my CEO, Griff Lynch, and the COO, Ed McCarthy, all these guys came from terminal operators. They worked for Maersk and APM terminals. So they have experience from an operations perspective, and they've established that 20% capacity as our benchmark to make sure that we can handle, because at any given time, I'll give you an idea, during Christmas time, September, October, is when we exceed that 20%. We go up to our full capacity for 2 or 3 months while the stores are loading up for us to shop. So we have to make sure that we have that, and through their experience over the years, container operators, they know that 20% is the standard for us to maintain to keep operational efficiency. So that is a standard within the marine business, marine container business. During COVID, we went below it. I kind of equate it to this way. You know, when all of us, we drive 65, 70 miles an hour on a highway, right? But when you look at on any given weekend, a NASCAR race, they're full throttle, right? 200 miles an hour. That 20% capacity, that's 200 miles an hour. That means that container terminal is at full NASCAR operations. It can't sustain that for very long. Maybe a week or two, but then our employees start running out of gas. Over time, sustain that kind of, well, just like a car can't be 200 miles an hour for an extended period of time. So we pull it back down and operate at the regular level most of the time, but we can get up to that NASCAR level if needed, like prior to Christmas. Gives you an idea, kind of an example how we think about it. Yes, ma'am.
As far as the inland ports go, like with the construction of the port in Gainesville, what kind of traffic impact analysis are done for that, and are any roadway improvements planned for?
Yes, yeah. Basically, two things on that. So, I don't know if this is good or bad. Well, for me, it's good. But, when GPA owns the property, back in 1945, when the GPA became the organization that it is, within the bylaws, the properties owned by the GPA and the building official of those properties is the Vice President of Engineering. So I am the chief building official for the GPA. So the only regulations that I must adhere to typically are federal regulations. State and local regulations from a development perspective, we do not have to adhere to if we don't want to. However, we do. We do. We're not forced to, let's put it that way, because it's an economic engine, it's an economic development. So traffic impact studies are typically a local or regional requirement. The GPA is exempt from that. When we enter our cargo and our cargo shows up on these terminals and off it goes, there technically would not require a traffic impact study to continue to expand. However, that's not the right thing to do. So when we do this, as the chief building official, I have to adhere to international building codes. Now, international building codes don't really get into the traffic components, but it's still the right thing to do to analyze and what kind of impacts do we have on the local roadway systems and implement improvements as necessary. So to answer your questions, yes, we do traffic impact analysis for all of our facilities. Do we have to? No, which is kind of interesting. But the right thing to do is to make sure that we don't impact our neighborhoods and that we partner with our folks next to us, and that we construct the proper road improvements necessary so that we levels of service that would not be acceptable to the general public. Because we want to do the right thing. That it's important that we do, even though we're not forced to do it, the right thing to do is to do it. Even though my boss may say, "Oh, Chris, come on, do we have, how long?" I tell him it's going to take me 6 months to get a traffic study. But when I'm building that ocean terminal, the city of Savannah or the neighbor is going to say, "Well, what is that going to do to our roads?" Here's a traffic study. Here's why we're doing what we're doing. So we have it. So we do them, but we're not required to. Does that answer your question? So I use my experience of that 1 year as a traffic engineer. Yes, sir.
I have a follow-up to that question. I'm a network engineer by trade, and so I heard everything you were speaking about in a throughput perspective. And it's really interesting that you're increasing the capacity that you have in the ports and in those connector locations, but there's always going to be a limiting throttling factor. And besides roads, the railways, in my mind, is the second thing that's throttling capabilities. How is the interaction working? I just came back from Europe, and Europeans love trains. And here we hate trains. Mm-hmm. It seems like they're being removed more than they're being improved and expanded upon. What type of relationship do you have with the different railway operators and getting permission to, because you talked about the bridge over the water. Well, there's also tunnels that trains have to go through that limit height too.
Yeah, we have a good relationship with the railroads. Remember, we're a customer of the railroads, of Norfolk Southern and CSX. We put boxes on their trains, so they make a great deal of money with us. So they're constantly improving their main lines to be more efficient. And then in turn, we have to improve our rail facilities. Now, Europe and the US, two different animals. We run by the car, right? It's the automobile is what we deal with. We will never never be the U.S. But the rail it must integrate properly for us to continue to expand and develop and not have the impacts to our surrounding areas. I would invite you to come down in Garden City, and you'll see, you will be amazed to be outside our terminals and see there's no traffic. The truck traffic is minimal because we get them in and out of our terminal very, very quickly and onto the highways. So there's, you know what, let me see here. I think I put it in my pocket. Let's go back to, let me show something to you guys. You guys don't have speech at the Rotary Club, do you? We're good? I want to make sure that I was better than that other group that went to that other seminar, that summer group. Now let's go all the way back here. So that hopefully when you guys leave here, you'll say, oh, okay, I get it. Let's go back all the way to my first slide here of Garden City. Okay, so down to the bottom, just below the word terminal, that's Garden City. Those are residents that live right there. It's important, and they don't realize that they've got the largest single container terminal right in their front yard. Why is that? It's because when we operate our facilities, first of all, those cranes have whisper alarms on them, not the beeping that you hear behind the FedEx truck. Whisper alarms, they can't hear the vehicles. And then those trucks are in and out of those gates and quickly on the highways so that they're not impacting the neighborhoods around our facilities. So there's a synergy that we do with our neighbors, that we work with tirelessly to make sure that they're comfortable with what we do on any one of our facilities. Example, here in Atlanta, you guys, you know, it's DeKalb at the end of the Beltway, right? There's a rail facility right there, right? That's a CSX rail facility. GPA is about to lease that property to make that a rail inland terminal. But before we do that, we're making sure that our neighbors around us are happy with what we're going to do. Now, we're not going to do what CSX had. When CSX was running that place, it was pretty congested. Ours is going to be a little bit different from a rail perspective, and it's not going to have the impacts that they had on CSX. So we work with the neighbors so that they understand how things are going to be and how it's going to operate. We're not going to be operating at 2 in the morning. And those are so that we're with our virgin neighbors. So it's an important aspect that, you know, I get involved some of it, but we've got a whole group of you know, corporate communications people that gets the message out on a lot of these things that you saw. It's a challenge. It's a daily challenge because Savannah, GPA is not the only operator on the Savannah River. There's over 20 operators on the Savannah River, right? If something happens or there's traffic jam in Savannah and they see a container truck or they see some cargo, who do they think it came from? Us. So even if there's 20 other or more other operators on that river, GPA is the one who is going to get pointed, and we need to make sure that our public exposure is in a positive light for everything that we do. Yes, sir.
You talked about the expansion you've done around Garden City, 100 acres you bought. Have to come. Could you talk about the regulations you had?
Regulations, basically, the Corps of Engineers, depending on the size of the project, we have to do an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement. Typically, an environmental assessment move through with those guys. Of course, it looks at the wetlands and the wildlife and the species and those kind of things. That's all part of the permits that we are required from a federal perspective before we can even think of breaking ground on any of our property. So we are partner and we work with the Corps of Engineers to make sure not only the land side, that's called a 404 permit, but also the water side is called a 408 permit. So we have to work both the river and the land side federally to make sure that we adhere to their requirements on the environmental side. That permit for Savannah Container Terminal, it's probably going to take at least 3 to 4 years. The amount of studies that are required, it's extensive, and justifiably so. An idea, just give you something about the river itself. So the Savannah river. It starts over in Augusta and makes its way all the way down to Savannah. It's a river. Whenever we do any kind of work on the river water side, one of the items that we have to review and we model is dissolved oxygen of the river. If you do anything, you reduce the oxygen in the river, and that causes problems with the fish and that kind of thing. So we have to mediate and put in systems in the river that booster up the oxygen in the river. That's part of the remediation that we do as well. Many components that we have to do, and I'll be the first to admit, I'll brag, I give the best tours. So if you guys come down to the GPA, I'll be more than happy to give you a tour on a bus, and I'll show you some of the cool stuff on some of these detailed things that we get into. And I enjoy explaining that to folks like you guys, because you guys get it. You know that there's a lot of technical thought that has to take place for us to resolve many of these issues that are before us. I'm surprised nobody asked me about Masdar. You know, the driverless electric cars. You guys didn't ask me about that at all. Oh, you didn't listen to the introduction. Okay. Yes, sir.
Are you using, I have seen ships, I have seen planes, I have seen trucks, I haven't seen any more.
Any what? Drone? That's where those photos are coming from, but no. You know, it's maybe past my lifetime they'll be moving containers with drones, but drone technology for what we do is mainly from an inspection perspective. You know, those cranes are quite high. We'll use drones to go back up and look at them structurally. But there's one thing about drones that other people in my organization frown on: security. So the GPA in that property has it's called a TWIC zone, Transportation Workers Identification Card Zone, and it is, of course, it could be a target for, you know, bad guys that come over from wherever. So the drones are very limited on our properties. The only drones that come into our facilities are ones that we own. Any private drones never make it on their way. And by the way, the Savannah Airport is kind of only the flight paths of the Savannah Hilton Head Airport, but the secure zone of our port facility prevents the use of that kind of equipment. I never thought I'd get a question. Yes, sir.
I wasn't going to ask you about NASCAR, but I'll ask you about Hollywood. Typically, shows, movies, the backdrop of a port in New York, Baltimore, Norfolk, perhaps, and you see nothing but rust and decay. Yeah. And you see this facility that's all shiny and new. Yeah. What's the difference in the management that you guys have versus your competitors?
That's an excellent question, and I can answer it pretty quickly. Most ports in the United States are, in the port facilities, like the port that I came from down in Fort Lauderdale, they are landlord ports. They don't operate the facility. Those ports are operated by the shipping lines or shipping companies. So their maintenance may not be up to snuff. In the Georgia ports, there are 2 ports that are operated by the state. So in other words, when I say that entire 1,350 acres is GPA operations, and people in those cranes are GPA employees. We own and operate that property. So we maintain, I'm responsible to maintain all of our facilities. We don't lease the property to an outside entity who would lack the maintenance, because they're all about profit. We're all about making sure that we're moving economic development. It may cost us a little bit more, but you don't see the rusty ugliness that you see in some of that's a very, I've never had that question, that's a good question. But that's the reason, is we are one of 2 operating ports on the East Coast. The other one is Charleston. So both of us have our own employees that maintain and operate the facility, whereas LA Long Beach, they have 13 different operators at all these terminals. So they all have different maintenance components and different requirements. So, and if a company starts losing some of their money, what's the first thing that gets cut? Maintenance. So the cranes get rusty and these kind of things, whereas we maintain our facilities because the value is massive to us. Very, very good question.
I think that's going to wrap us up.
Oh.
We're right at time, so we're great.
Perfect,
So,
perfect.
let's give a round of applause.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you guys, as always, for coming out. We look forward to seeing you guys in August. Drive safe. If you are interested in hanging around, talking, by all means, please continue to do so. There's some leftover food that you are welcome to grab as well. Drive safe, buckle up, and we'll see you in about a month. Thanks.